and Exotic Plant Society. Don't make me whistle, people. I will whistle.
Where I will, we know.
Before we get started, we have name tag now. Quiet, please. And we do have a microphone, but I'm not going to use it because I don't really need it. I have a big mouth. It can be loud. I can use it real loud. So anyway, I want to just thank everyone for coming. It's a great place crowd. I want to thank everybody who brought this amazing raffle table. We're going to be doing something different because we have so many plants and so many hours in a day that there's going to be sometimes 2 plants per cup. So if you see one cup with 2 plants behind it, that means those 2 plants go to that 1 cup. So otherwise, it's going to be here till midnight. We have food in the back. I want to thank Ralph for stopping by, Bobby, Domino's for us again. So far, we've been engaged in the shops. We are live, we're being streamed live, so I've got to be very careful what I say. I'll do my best. And that's it, basically. We have a really great presentation. We have all the plants back here. Just jump. You can buy it from jump. Very reasonably priced. Very reasonably priced. And without further ado, to bring on our speakers. Prominent growers and nurserymen in Florida. When it comes to cycads, bromeliads, palms, this guy travels the world, extensively. I cannot speak, but he is really a very special person, a very special speaker, very knowledgeable. So without further ado, so he's finished talking to Troy, I'm going to bring him up. So give a round of applause for Chip Jones.
Okay, thank you for having me here. Do I need a microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Is it working?
Yeah, turn it on.
Okay. We got a lot of ground to cover, and if there's time after the slideshow, I'll tell you what I brought. There's some interesting plants, and they're unique. If anybody's into cycads, here's one copy of the cycad cultivation handbook that I brought. This is my book, and there's one copy available. But let's get going with Bromeliad Breeders, and it's kind of cool to do this for this group. Last year in West Palm Beach was the World Conference. Coming up next year, there will be a World Conference in California, and 2 years after that at Nong Nuc in Thailand. So start saving your money, because whatever you can imagine of the greatest thing you could do with plants, Nong Nuc will blow your mind. It's even better than the best you could imagine. But this was the World Conference that we had right here in our backyard in West Palm Beach. And there was a lot going. There's a lot in this talk. So essentially, I had this idea that I would interview people because the speakers were really good. And so I had, say, 12 interviews, each an hour long. And I had to listen to them all again a year after I did the interviews and make notes. And I put a lot of the notes in slides, so I won't read. I'll let you do the reading, and I'll just keep talking and tell you some stories. Part of the conference was the speakers. Dr. Terry Burt was doing this talk, and it was really cool because she did a talk about how to write plant names and the grammar and taxonomy of writing bromeliad plant names. And Herb Hill did this talk that blew everybody's mind. Andrew Devonshire had 2 talks. There's a lot of name dropping. You may not know these names. And then talking to people, there were a lot of name dropping. And I had to research all of these people, and it was really cool to get to learn. So hopefully you'll get to some of that tonight. These are the speakers. The guy in the middle is Tom Remigio. He did not do a talk, but he organized all these people. And Tom did speakers for the West Palm Beach Bromeliad Society. And it was about 10 years ago, and he brought Grant Groves out, and when Grant spoke, the Bullises came from Homestead all the way to West Palm to hear it. The same for David Sheehy, flew in from Hawaii, and everybody came. People came from all over Florida, the famous breeders came. So Tom has relationships with a lot of Bromeliad people, and he organized this group. And Tom's always running his mouth. He never stops talking, so I included him with the speakers. This is Peter Bach, and it was a pleasure to meet him the same weekend. So there were plant sales. This was the first organized Bromeliad sale I'd ever done. And you're seeing my booth in the background. This is Pamela Coit Hyatt. She's like my new spirit animal. She's the greatest person I've met in a long time. Her nursery is called Bird Rock Tropicals, and I'll talk a little more about her. And on the right is Chester Skotak, and I've done a talk maybe for this group called Bromeliad Breeding and what it takes to be a magician of bromeliads. And Chester's the best breeder in all the world. So he wasn't a speaker, and he just came and registered for the conference. And Tom said the registrations are a little low, and we're not getting people jumping in. And so Chester registered for the conference and then put on Facebook that he was going to be coming, and suddenly the numbers shot up. And so he came out and had a good time. Eloise Beach makes these tags you see at the bottom, and she's always stressed, and she showed up late. She's trying to get her tags organized. And then, you know, by the pre-sale, the VIP pre-sale, everything she brought was already sold anyway. So this is Alex Bello, who you know from this group, and my booth in the background. So this was my booth and stuff that I took, some that you see here. There was a judge plant show, and this group did a show and sale. And it was not just a plant sale, but there's a judge show. And so one year I took this plant. It was the mother of what you see in the picture. It's called Alcantaria John Stoddard. And it was in bloom, and I brought it to the show, and it sat right here in this very room. And it won the award for Best Flowering Plant Show because it was blooming at the time. And after the weekend and the show was over, it had this like 8-foot flower, and I couldn't get it in my car, so I just took a saw and chopped it, and everybody gasped, and it made it pup. And these are the babies you see, and I wanted to take one of these babies, but I didn't know if I do the biggest one or the one with the most leaves or the cleanest one, and how do you take a plant like that to a show? So the deal for me is that I have to wash it 5 or 6 or 7 times because I hose it off with reverse osmosis water and scrub it with a toothbrush and sometimes use Dawn dish soap. And I get all the tree frogs and the pine needles and all the things down in the leaf axils and wash it out and have to dump it upside down because it holds tremendous amounts, gallons of water. And so after every wash, I have to dump it without breaking leaves. And after washing it every day for a week, then I repot it to get it centered in the pot and everything straight, looking great. And so I picked my plant, got it washed for a week, and repotted it. Everything was great. I took it to the show, and everybody was already there. There was no place to park. I was like 40 miles out in the parking lot, and I was walking back and forth with stuff. When I opened my trailer to take the first plants out, the shelf that I had built, trays of bromeliads fell off the shelf and landed in the plant, and it was covered in dirt. And then everybody was already there, and so all the cool kids were already unloading their stuff, and there was no water hose, and I couldn't clean it in front of everybody, and I started to just close the trailer and go back home. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. How do you clean this thing? And it had been repotted, so loose dirt. I couldn't turn it upside down. And I did the best I could, and I cleaned it some without breaking it, but I broke some leaves. And after taking one of these things, some of my plants won ribbons. I brought the thing in the middle was Deuteraconia brevifolia. You'd have a hard time finding it, but there's an incredible specimen here at Fairchild. I was shocked when I found it. The one on the right is Max Special. I brought a plant that's the father, and it's an amazing bromeliad, but this slide's out of place, but long story short, my plant won commercial grower best in show. Dirt and all, unwashed, loaded with broken leaves, it still won best in show. So I was really thrilled, and the award that it won is the Mulford Foster. I don't know if you can see the seashell, the Mulford Foster Award. These are original pieces of art by Mulford Foster, and it's hard to photograph. One on the left's got some glare. The one on the right actually has a side cap with a cone in it, and it doesn't really look very bromeliad. But these are Mulford Foster, and his wife was Racine Foster. And so, does anyone know the name Mulford Foster? One person. Mulford Foster is somebody you want to Google. If there ever was a good Netflix documentary, I think Mulford Foster would be a guy I would write a biography about. When you hear 1978, you think it's pretty contemporary, right? Everybody in this room, I think 1978 is like yesterday. You know, like Freddie Mercury, Queen, we were all rocking, we were young at the skating rink. But then if you hear 1888, you think like Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, was only 30 years old at the time. It was a new theory. The contemporary would be like Alfred Russel Wallace, or another famous explorer, Humboldt, was a little bit before that time. But Mulford Foster was born in 1888, died in 1978. So he goes like from Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin all the way to Freddie Mercury and Queen. And I'm sure he was rocking out on his last days. The man had many careers. He was a bird-watching guide and a naturalist and a nature guide. He was a landscape architect and architect, and later in life he became a professional botanist, and he described 170 species of bromeliads, only bromeliads. And so their genera, his wife was Racine Foster, and they did a lot of things together, and a lot of books and things that are published. He would write to Marie from Mulford and Racine. And now there's a bromeliad that I think everybody in this room's probably killed 3 times, Tillandsia diariana, you know, the pretty little orange thing with the white flower that pops out. And that was moved out of Tillandsia to Racinae. And I always wondered what this Racinae genus was. It's named after Mulford Foster's wife. And a lot of the bromeliad species like Orlandiana, Mulford Foster's nursery was in Orlando. So he named the species Orlandiana for the city of Florida. So these are the speakers, and what I realized was, like, Herb Hill sells material that goes through the Netherlands, and Chester's Gotack sells material through Belgium, and Pedro Nau does Japan and South America. And Hero does Japan and all the world, and then there's New Zealand and Australia represented. So I thought, you know, these guys are really amazing that their bromeliads are probably on every continent of the planet, including if there's a potted plant in Antarctica, one of these guys bred that. So I had this idea to talk to all of them, and then as I went through, I added a couple other people. And so I emailed the people a list of questions, and they had a chance to think a little about what I was going to talk, and I asked for a 15-minute interview. Most of them talked to me for an hour, and they just wouldn't stop talking. And some were really reluctant. They wouldn't do anything, and waited, and then suddenly when they sat down, they just told me every little detail. And it was being recorded. There was a tripod, it was video, they knew it was being recorded, and they named the names, and they talked dirt, and they told me all these funny stories. It was amazing. This picture's actually not out of focus. That's Juan Gruber, and he moves at the speed of light, so you just can't get a good picture. Chester's Gotack's a good grower, and he says that Juan's father, Hans Gruber, is the best bromeliad grower in the world. And they're about 2 hours outside Bogota, and access to everything Colombian, that Cecropia telenatita, the silver mountainside you see out of Medellin. They can grow that, collect seed, grow it. Chester gave me a community pot. I brought it to Florida, and like within a month, they were just toast. Did not like our heat. But those were the questions. Jumping right in, the first breeder I talked to was Grant Groves, the most down-to-earth guy and incredibly successful. And Grant worked at Color Zone Tropicals, was his nursery. He ran the nursery for a long time, and he started as a kid breeding bromeliads, and he said his first hybrids, he had bromeliads as a child, and did this his entire life. He's still breeding. And the first he did, he mixed a blue Gamma-Sepala with Caliculata, which is yellow. So what do you get when you mix blue and yellow? Right, you guys are smarter than Grant or me, because if you do this and then you wait 4 years to get a flower and it turns out green and nobody wants it, you wasted 4 years, right? Or you have to think a little about what you're doing. Grant tells the story, this is really amazing, that he worked for Bert Foster, and Bert Foster was Mulford Foster's son. And when Bert Foster got married, what do you think his father gave him? A house? A trip around the world? No, he got a bromeliad. But that bromeliad was called Blushing Bride, and it's thought to be extinct now. It doesn't exist. But Blushing Bride had specific genetics in it that led to all of Grant Groves breeding. And first, a lot of breeders did these marmorations, and this is a Grant Groves plant called Medusa. And you see the bands, right? And this is the famous Chester Skotech plant called Hannibal Lecter. And Hannibal Lecter is one of the parents of virtually everything else that you see on the table that's a Skotech plant like this. And so some breeders embrace those marmorations in the bands and make the bands even more beautiful. And then this plant, the bands explode into blotching. And there's one I brought called Excitation. Somebody bought it. It's a beautiful thing where the bands just explode into blotches. And that's kind of a new line of breeding. But Grant went the other way. And normally bromeliads have color, and all these have this quality that you see the color in the middle, right? That's what we think of with traditional bromeliad breeding. That you see this, and then when it gets ready to bloom, there's a little red color in the center. Or you get a green plant, and when it blooms, it starts turning color, and you get a little color as it finishes. So Grant found this plant called Blushing Bride, and Neo Passion was one of the first plants. And he worked generation after generation to get all the stripes and bars and marmorations out and to get a clean looking plant like this, or variegated like this. And then ultimately, one of the ones, his first commercial success, is named Magali, and it turns out Magali is his ex-wife. Personally, I like Magali as a plant better than Kelly Girl. Kelly Girl's named for his current wife that was married like 12 years. Magali gets huge. This is actually a variegated Magali, and it starts off green and white, but the color is so dominant that it immediately starts turning red, and the red overpowers the variegation, overpowers the green. And this thing swells up and gets larger than you would expect, and it is the reddest of red. It's beautiful. Magali's a fantastic plant, and when Grant did the talk a number of years ago in West Palm Beach, he had this as an example, and I bought it from him. He didn't want to sell it, and I paid him a bunch of money, and I got it, and now you can get these for $20 to $50 or so, depending on size. But this variegated Magali was the first really rare bromeliad that I got, and it's always been special to me. And it's still, compared to everything, a really high quality plant. But Grant's breeding was to get rid of all of these bars and stripes and to get nice clean plants. And he said that along the way, as you're a breeder, you throw out 90 to 99% of what you do, and you keep very little. This plant is an old one that's virtually extinct. Nobody grows it. It's called Purple Star, and I really like this. It's $10. It's always purple. It's a neat thing, but he improved this, and it went to tissue culture, and it was the first time bromeliads really went to Home Depot. And it's called Voodoo Doll, and Voodoo Doll was tissue cultured. And so Grant did have great commercial success. He's probably one of the most commercial bromeliad growers or breeders in the U.S., Chester Skotak being the other, and believe it or not, you'd think they're in competition, but they're great friends. Grant says his mistake was selling seedlings, that if you're a breeder and you throw out everything, you hate to throw it away, but if it doesn't quite make the cut, you don't know what to do with it. And he's also, you need money, because potting soil is not free. So he sold a lot of plants. A lot of them went to a bromeliad nursery here in Homestead, and you look at a lot of their plants, and they're basically like watered down versions of the Grant Groves things that were ultimately released. But he says his biggest mistake was letting some of his genetics get out, which then became the basis of a breeding program for another nursery here in Miami. Names like DeRoos and Foremost. Foremost is a massive company. If you want to buy 10,000 pups of a rare bromeliad, you just call Foremost. They'll ship it from Costa Rica. It comes in 3 days, no problem. Foremost is huge, and DeRoos is a Belgian company, and they're one of the biggest in the world. And then Kornbach actually has, Peter Bach has a sister in Costa Rica, and they do bromeliads from the Netherlands and Costa Rica also, and lots of international trade. These are more of Grant's plants. Magali, the ex-wife we talked about. Now he's retired. He has a very small greenhouse. He mainly goes scallop fishing, and he sets his lobster traps, and he loves stone crabbing, and so he's an outdoorsman. He goes fossil hunting, but he's a very serious bromeliad breeder. So he says, one of the questions I asked him all, do you have a namesake plant? And he just laughed, and he told me the story that he was given a plant by these Australians, Mel and Michelle. And then years later, he was given a plant from Eloise Beach, and he thought they were the exact same plant. But Eloise told him he wasn't allowed to sell the plant that she gave him. And if you're a grower, over the course of 5 or 10 years, you end up with a little corner of a table that's got a whole bunch of plants on it. And he had a little group of this thing, and when he sold his nursery, and he sold all the inventory, ultimately he said, oh, it's the same thing that Mel and Michelle gave me, Eloise won't care, and so he sold all of this plant off. Well, Eloise found out that he sold them, and so she registered a plant with the BSI index called Backstabber. So, you know, there's a little ruthlessness in the bromeliad world, but Grant sat there and just laughed about it and told me the story. Hero was the last person I got to interview, and he fought me and hid from me, and I was like the plague. And ultimately, on the last night after the banquet, he walked straight up to me and he said, Dennis Cathcart told me I should do this, so let's go. And he's best buddies with Pam, and they do Tillandsias. Tillandsias are not my personal favorite. I like hybrid variegated Negroes. But he does Tillandsia, and Pam is the most amazing Tillandsia person. This lady has traveled. She's done all of the travel. Anywhere on the planet that a Tillandsia grows. She traveled with Warner Rao all across Peru. She's done Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, you name it, she's been there. And she's a wonderful person, and from what I hear, you go into her nursery, everything's in perfect straight rows, everything's in its own cup, everything's labeled, everything's organized, and perfectly grown. So Hero corresponded with Pam for a number of years, going back into the 80s, when he would write to her by fax machine. Okay, he's a young guy, but he would correspond by fax machine, and he would write, Dear Mr. Hyatt, do you have the following? And she would write back, yes, I have it, I'll ship it Tuesday or whatever. And for 4 years they corresponded. until they both went to a Bromeliad World Conference, and he came running up to meet Mr. Pampayat and went, I think I've made a mistake. And they're still best friends. So he tells these crazy stories. There are no native Tillandsias in Japan. You realize, like, we have many species native here in Florida. You can't kill a Tillandsia in Florida. You can run over it with your lawnmower and it'll still live. But in Japan, the climate is not set for bromeliads, and their bromeliads are all New World. They're from the Americas. There is a Tillandsia in Madagascar, which is African, Old World, but it's thought that the seed blew over on a hurricane or some kind of current, and so a New World plant established in Africa. But bromeliads are New World. So Hiro talks about traveling 30 hours from Japan to get to a place like Peru, and going to remote areas where, if you're used to food in Tokyo and you're many hours and you don't see a human being for 2 or 3 or 4 days at a time, when you do see someone is rural and they're amazed to see an Asian person and a tall Asian person. And so they invite you in the house and expect you to eat something. And then you get some GI bug and you're sick for a week when you get home after a 30-hour flight with diarrhea. So you really have to love bromeliads if you can endure that much travel to do it. But this guy is a vascular surgeon, and he said, when I asked him how much of his life is plants and how much of his life is bromeliads, he said 60-40. And then he giggled and he said the 60's plants. He says being a vascular surgeon, he can do very small things. And so it makes him a good plant breeder because he knows all the parts and can do the pollinations. And he gets a kick out of making new names, because if you take two genera that aren't supposed to mix and naturally would have no overlap, and then you make a hybrid, you get to call that genus a new name. You know, all the orchids are famous for that. And then when Laelias moved to Myrmecophila or Schomburgkia, then all the hybrids have to be renamed. And when Cattleya is now Boranthe, all the hybrids aren't BLC anymore. So things get new names when you make these intergeneric hybrids. When he calls his plants, I would just say that's tissue culture, and it really is. He just was emphatic to say, I don't do tissue culture. I just grow plants. But I said, you sterilize green pods and you grow them on agar and vitro in sterile conditions. And he goes, of course. And I said, we call that tissue culture. And he goes, that's just growing a plant. So he's a very modest guy, but serious and amazing. You can see these names: Solar Glow, Deep Red, Hannah. He's also released the only variegated Tillandsias, and his hybrids are really good. But he's doing these things like the racinaes are hard for us to grow, and we kill a lot of them. The Willisii also don't grow so well here in Florida. We kill those, but he's making these weird hybrids. Dr. Terry Burke does a lot of talks in Florida. I won't go into her stuff, but she, you know, to describe her, she didn't do an interview because she was working like 4 jobs for the conference. And she emailed me her answers along with her Bromeliad CD, which was like 18 pages long. So Dennis Cathcart technically isn't a breeder, but by having the best Bromeliad nursery in the world, he has employed breeders and paid the salary of breeders that made plants that he sold in his nursery. And Dennis can do things that we can't. Most all of us in this room can't get away with it. Dennis did a lot of wild collecting, and he can actually publish stories on his blog about smuggling human skulls from Ecuador, or not Ecuador, I'm sorry, from Mexico, and crossing the border, getting inspected by the customs agent. He would, you know, move the skull to the other side of the car and kick it under the car, and then they would finish one side and go to the other side, and he would move the skull back. And then they impounded the car for the night, so they pushed it to the middle and waited until they released the quarantine the next day, and then grabbed the skull and put it in the car and drove away. We can't tell those stories without going to jail. And he talks about being pulled off an airplane in Ecuador with 14 suitcases full of wild collected Tillandsias, and telling the security that they were from a nursery down the block. And they couldn't prove that they weren't from a nursery versus wild collected. And so after a few minutes of scratching their heads, they said, okay, have a nice flight. So Dennis can actually tell those stories, and you love him, and he's great. He's been going to Cuba lately, and ironically, like 4, 5, 6 trips to Cuba, but he still hasn't seen a bromeliad in Cuba that doesn't naturally occur in Florida also, like fasciculata. And so he's still thrilled and wants to go back again and again. And he's an explorer. You can read his book. It's 2 versions, 2 copies. It's for a Haitian thing that he did a lot of exploration in Haiti and through the Caribbean. And he started his career as a reptilian, and he would go collect reptiles. And ultimately, the passion changed, and there was a trip once upon a time where he went thinking he was going to collect reptiles. He only looked at bromeliads and came home with suitcases full of bromeliads, and then never switched back and has always loved bromeliads. Asking the craziest things that have happened with him, he could tell some crazy stories, but he talked about after a week of travel, dumping out his bromeliads when he got home and finding a venomous snake that he'd been traveling with for a week. Dennis is a wonderful guy and has had the best collection of bromeliads for a long time. When Gardens by the Bay came about, basically all of Tropicflora Nursery went to Singapore, and a great relationship worldwide. And he talks about his best commercial success was this one Tillandsia that he sold over 500,000 through the years. So if I gave you a chance to read, I want to keep moving. There's Pedro Naum. You know this guy? You can find him on Facebook. I met him, and shortly after I did, I had to go into Peru, and he told me about this project to look for land races of Anonis famosus, and that's the pineapple. If I ask you how many species of pineapple are there, how many can you name? Anyone? Pineapple, right? I would tell you a hint is that it's the same number of coconuts in the world. There's one species of coconut, Cocos nucifera, there's one species of pineapple. All the world, one pineapple. Can you believe it? But there are big pineapples, little pineapples. Chester describes it saying that pineapples are heterozygous, that they're not true from seed. Like peach trees are true. You can take a peach tree, collect the seed, and it's going to look like the mother. Doesn't work with pineapples. You grow 100,000 seedlings, you get 100,000 varieties. So Pedro is racing Chester Skotak and is actually winning at doing a red pineapple where the inside of the fruit is red. And he has patented, internationally trademarked plants that are already in cultivation in Louisiana and Japan. And he's doing a project to explore every navigable waterway of the Amazon. And it's incredible. Bolivia, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, and I didn't believe it. I didn't think it could be possible, but this dude is really doing it. And he tells stories of being a mountain climber. If you're Brazilian, the Inselbergs are just big monolithic granite cliffs. And Chester Skotak has a plant called Pita, and it's gone commercial. It's a beautiful plant. And when I asked Chester what does Pita mean, he said it's a combination of the 5 plants that were used to make it. And I just accepted that until I realized Pita is only 4 letters. So how are there 5 plants? And then I heard that it was wild collected, and I thought, how is it? What's he talking about? And then one day I was in the shower and I realized Pita means pain in the ass. It's an acronym. And Pedro describes this well, that if you want to collect a variegated plant that you find on a cliff, you risk your life and you do cliff hanging and you climb mountains and you pull the plants off the cliffs. When I asked the craziest things he'd done, he talked about going out by himself to an Inselberg, climbing a cliff and falling 30 meters and cracking ribs and getting all banged up and having to lay there and then pull himself out and crawl to his car and drive home. So he's got a couple of plants named after him. There's a Alcantarilla naumii, But Brazil's really tight. All of South America will put you in jail for plant collecting. Like, you can't even, bromeliad seeds are like feathers, they're like dust. But no one will even send a birthday card and put a few seeds under the stamp when they lick the stamp. Like, you can't get anything out of Brazil. No, everyone's afraid of going to jail. And that's Peru, you know, with Fragmipedium Cavachii caused a problem with botanical gardens and changed the whole botanical garden paradigm. Brazil is crazy. Elton Lindy is a bromeliad guy. He's described other bromeliads. He's a judge and an environmentalist and a botanist. But Elton Lindy would love to throw anyone in jail. If you go to Brazil, you find some plant, you put a seed in your suitcase, he would love to throw you in jail for that. It's a serious thing. Conservation in Brazil is a serious thing, and the same with Colombia. Like, collecting from the wild in Colombia is a hard thing to do that serious botanists don't get collecting permits and can't do the work. But Pedro has been doing this. He's got a nursery. This is what he's got. This clone is out. And I don't mean that the foliage is red. I mean, when you cut the fruit open, pineapple outside is red, the interior is red. Asking him who he was inspired by, he mentioned Chester Skotak, Elton Lindy, Rafael Oliveira is a Brazilian folk singer, Franz Gruber, the guy from Colombia I mentioned. Pedro's a young guy, he's my age, he listens to R.E.M., The Cure, The Smiths, he's like, just like one of my friends should be, but he's this incredible scientist. I included Steve Hoffman, who wasn't one of the speakers. Steve now lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, but he's the cryptanthus guy. He's pretty selective, so he's only released 22, he's only registered 22 plants, 22 named hybrids. He tells the story of going to a world conference and someone bidding on one of his plants, and it's this lady, Lisa Vincent. She's kind of, I've heard, reclusive and no one sees her, talks to her, but she's one of the better Bromeliad breeders. So Steve was partnered with Dr. Larry Giroux, who is still involved with Cryptanthus also, and is highly involved with the Caloosahatchee Bromeliad Society on the West Coast, one of the better Bromeliad groups in Florida. It's in Fort Myers. So Herb Hill was like the biggest surprise for me. Has anybody heard of Herb Hill? Marie, you know everybody. You're not worthy. I did not know Herb Hill, and Grant Grove said, "Oh my God, come here, I'll introduce you. You've got to interview Herb, he's cool." And when I wanted to do this talk and add some slides, I called him, and I just Googled him, found a phone number, called. His wife goes, "He's outside watering the plant, let me go get him." And he came and he goes, "Listen, whatever you want to do, I don't care. You have my permission. Just do a good job with it." So hopefully I did that. When Herb's a Florida guy, he was born in Miami, grew up in the Everglades, loves nature. He talked about Irvin Northman. I had to do a lot of research to find his nursery. He was an early Florida nurseryman. So Herb started with this Freesia freeburgensis, which is what you see at the top. And then the plants below this guy on the bottom picture are what his breeding is like now. And it's like, how do you get from one place to another in a lifetime? He's not doing primary hybrids with species plants. He's doing very complex 7th generation, across 7th generation. He's essentially down to a few breeding lines a year. He green pods, meaning he does all the breeding, makes the cross, waits till the seed pod is ready, and then he ships it to the Netherlands, and they germinate it in a test tube and do all the work from there on in the Netherlands. So this is Bromeliad Breeders. They're in the Netherlands. They did this video, and this dude narrated, and he's like, "Here at Bromeliad Bromeliads, we love Herb. Everything we grow, Herb bred. We only work with hybrids by Herb. He's our hero." And it just went on. And then in this video, shows their operation, and they go back at the end to talk about how herb is the basis of everything they do. 24 acres of greenhouse, all climate controlled, dozens and dozens and hundreds of employees, but like 99% are computer programmers. That the plants start off in tissue culture, and a live person actually pulls them out of the flask. And then they have a robotic arm that picks up the seedlings and puts them on trays. And then they roll through a conveyor and get watered, and a computer scans them with lasers and analyzes the plants to try to look at the genetics by computer algorithm of some sort. And then they go on to a conveyor that puts them on a table that a machine moves, and they sit in the nursery for weeks. Then a machine moves them again, and a robotic arm pulls them from the tray and pots them, and then they go through getting sprayed and back onto trays, and 35 weeks later, these things are ready to go to market. Human hands virtually never touch them, and it's a beautiful process of the most incredibly grown plants, this is all Herb Hill's work that he exclusively breeds for this company, and we don't even know this guy, and he lives right here in Florida. But it's mostly the European market, and they can, when these are ready, print any label, care instructions, your nursery name, if you're going to be retailing these, if you're the big box store, your name can go on them. They can go in decorative ceramic pots or Christmas wrapping, whatever you want. They have a robot that can package the plants. It's an incredible process, and in a cold climate. Andrew Devonshire is from New Zealand. He is works in the finance industry. He has a day job. And in New Zealand, the climate's very cold. And so things we grow don't really grow there. It's a lot of foliage freezes. And so he started with hybrid neos, and to do anything with variegation, to get something with stripes like this that are variegated, you don't just pump it out. If you go traditional breeding and grow hundreds of thousands, you'll get 0.1% variegated, and it may be only half variegated. What happens is that you start breeding and you get somewhere along the way, it's something you like, and then you cross that with a transmitter that can put the variegated gene into the babies. It's a transmitter. So he discovered that there was a transmitter in New Zealand and started breeding Neorigelias, and now he's off to the races. When I asked him some of the craziest things he'd done, like bromeliad flowers are open for a day. And yes, it'll make flowers for days, but if you want to breed this plant with this plant, often what you do is not just let the flower on their own, because you might miss it. One flowers, this one's in bloom, this one isn't. So what you do is ethylene gel of Florel, and you dose them with the gel, and the gas induces flower. But this one might flower in 38 days, and this one might flower in 50 days. So if I dose them the same day, they're 12 days apart. It doesn't work, right? You have to know these things and say, this is 38 days, I'm going to dose this one, wait 12 days, then I hit this one, and then I have 5 to 10 days where my flowers might be in sync. I take this as the pollen donor, I take the pollen, dust it onto this plant, and then I do a controlled hybrid of these two. That's breeding. These bench hybrids where I go, oh look, here's a cone, and what else do I have? What can I put this pollen in? And you look for anything available. That's not really the way you get to the point of commercial success without years and years of doing it. So when I asked Andrew some of the craziest things he'd done, he said that he had actually taken a bromeliad on a family holiday with his wife and kids because the flowers were going to open and he didn't want to miss it. And he had excused himself from business meetings at work and he called it the boot of the car. We would say the trunk. But he had bromeliads in the boot that were in bloom, and he left a meeting at noon at the best time to pollinate and went to pollinate a plant and then ran back to his meeting. That's dedication, and you know, if that's what it takes to get it, he's having commercial success, and really good guy, serious guy, a lot of fun, and doing good work. So he says the science is simple, but if you add the artistic flair, that's where it becomes interesting, and you're only limited by your own imagination. And that's inspiring to me. Chester is the most inspiring. He talks about the commercial pineapple. He calls it DC-10 or whatever the name. He said that 100 men worked 30 years to get the pineapple that all the world eats. Every pineapple you've eaten virtually your whole life came out of Hawaii, and it took 100 men 30 years to get that clone. So he's not doing any transgenic work. He is doing traditional breeding, and he worked for Dole, but he left Dole, and he bought land, he got a business partner, and he and one person have been doing 100,000 pineapples a year. And that sounds great, right? 100,000 is a lot of pineapples. If you take a community pot like this and you think, oh, I can grow 1,000 seeds and look for the variegated one. Well, that's great because it would take up about one table. But then if you go to repot this community pot, suddenly you get trays like this, and it would fill the whole table for one community pot. And doing a whole table of community pots would fill all the tables in this room. So Chester's been doing 100,000 pineapples a year, and if you need 1 in 30 million, it means it would take you 300 years, if I'm doing the math right, 300 years to get a commercial success pineapple. But Chester's the Bromeliad magician. He is an amazing guy. And if you call him and say, like, hey, I want to start breeding, what would you tell me? He'll say, let me save you a lot of trouble. You do this, this, and this. He'll tell you all the secrets. He does videos all the time. And so I thought I was going to throw him a curveball. And I said, you know, you've been emailed all the questions. You know what I'm going to ask. But let me ask you something. To the people that say all your plants look alike, what do you tell the critics? And he goes, God damn it, they do. You know, I thought he was going to say, like, you can't look at a small plant like this. You have to grow it to its potential and see the size, and whether it's a tubular form or an open rosette or whether it has large spines. No, he's like, the breeding of stars and bars is done to saturation. Everybody in the world's doing it. There's nothing left to do. He said it's time to find new things to work with. And he's working on B. hyana crosses. Andrew Devon's our mentor, B. hyana also. That's from Brazil. It's thought to be a complex of plants that maybe there are 100 species. Most of them, the forest that they came from, the forest is all gone, doesn't exist anymore. The plants are all extinct, and they only exist in collections. And so Chester is always going, hey, do you have any B. hyana types? And ironically, all the ones I grow I bought from Eloise. Eloise got them from Chester. So I don't have anything new to offer him. And the last time I went to visit, we walked outside in full sun were these things that were blue. I mean, like crazy blue bromeliad with pink tips. And he goes, get some scissors, cut you 10 or 20 pups. And I felt guilty. I took like 5, and now I wish I'd taken 20. Really cool because they're slow growing. But that's the new breeding. Hopefully you read that. This at the top is one of his B. hyanas. And at the bottom right is more of a species plant. So you can see kind of the difference. The middle picture shows Ichnia fasciata. And if you go to like Deleon Bromeliads that does stuff that goes to Home Depot, or you know, any of the big box stores, you see fasciatas. Nobody in this room probably has Ichnia fasciata in the greenhouse or the garden, because it was a plant that was great 50 years ago. But Chester taught me this, that if the color's always pink and you self it generation after generation after generation, after 6 or 7 or 8 generations, 2 things happen. 1, you get an inbreeding depression, which is bad. But 2, you get color break, and from pink on pink, you get whites and reds. And then you go with that again, and you start getting lavenders and other colors. And so this isn't like a Benjamin Moore color chart where you Photoshop in the picture of your wall and then you put any color you want on it. But it's like this click and drag color wheel when you visit the nursery, because there's like a little table, and on the table are all these miniature things where the flower, the inflorescence, is heavier than the foliage of the plant. That you've got more flower substance than the plant, and every color under the sun. And it's from inbreeding again and again, generation after generation. And he's also done spineless variety with spineless variety, so these now have no thorns at all. And then once you get the colors you like, you back cross it to get hybrid vigor and start pushing other colors and other characteristics that you want to breed in. So truly amazing, good stuff. That's Chester. He says he's doing 45,000 seedlings. Out of 45,000 seedlings, 4 were good parents. And everything else goes in the trash. This is what I told you, 100 men work 30 years to get MD2. And so he's trying to do this with one person. Peter Tristram was my top guy. That he's what started this whole thing. And this guy was a school teacher. He was not a professional botanist. He's not a scientist. He's now doing molecular biology. And Australia is really tight. Like the work that he's doing now is with tillandsias. And if you have a tillandsia and you have a tillandsia, most likely you both bought it from Marie, and Marie got it from someone who went to Habitat to get it. And essentially in Australia, you can trace every single plant in the whole country all the way back to Habitat, because the import restrictions are so tight that every import, every time a new species is introduced into Australia, it's essentially a paper trail. Everyone knows exactly who did it and where it came from. And so they're actually doing a lot of really neat molecular work to take garden plants and then looking at population genetics and habitat because of the strictness of Australia. So he's done all these things. He grew up as a naturalist kid and went from growing vegetables to native plants. Grew up in Sydney, now has retired to the Sunshine Coast around Brisbane. One interesting thing I didn't think of, he says that Sydney and Rio are essentially the same latitude, and that what grows well in Rio grows well in Sydney, and that a lot of the ships went from Australia to the New World and back and forth. And so a lot of ships ballast and a lot of people brought plants, and so you can actually see a lot of the exact plants that came in the early days of ships exploring the New World in Australian gardens. Really fascinating to me. So Peter released all these hybrids. He's got a lot of registered plants. He started at a World Conference in 1988. So he's been serious about bromeliads for a long time. He's traveled the world with people like Grace Good and Harry Luther. I first learned about him with all the pictures of him traveling with Chester Skotak. And so all these variegated things, some of these are pictures from my garden. Bruce Dunstan actually did the crosses, and one of them is called Bruce Dunstan. And Bruce found a variegated Alcantaria that came from a group of seedlings that were green, but it's a beautiful plant. It's named after the guy that had it in his collection. But a lot of the Bruce Dunstan variegated Alcantarias came through Peter registering and releasing and putting these out to the world. This is my shade house. On the left is Aurora, on the right is Mellow Yellow, and on the back is just an unnamed Australian clone. But they're all these different names. They're all seedlings from the same grass done by Bruce Dunstan. Talking about the craziest thing he's ever done, he went to Colombia to look for this Havea ospinae, and it's a plant that's been in cultivation forever. I mean, it would be like something you can find at Home Depot trying to go find it in Habitat. Commercially, it's done, it's been there. And so they actually found it in Colombia in a place that was cartel controlled, and they're risking their lives and shouldn't be there. They're told they should leave. And they're jumping up and down and running and screaming through the forest and on the road. And he says now Google Earth has mapped it, and you can actually see the trees from Google Street View without ever leaving your living room. But to go from Australia to Colombia to find what we consider a Home Depot plant, you've got to be passionate. So he's a great guy. There's a conference going in Australia, and he invited me to come couch surf and stay at his place. Also at this conference was Graham Barclay, and he's another big name in the bromeliads in New Zealand. So he mentioned Sally Partis and Artastic, and I heard all these names of people. So I had to keep researching to learn more. If you say, like, who's a musician that you would, if you could go to any concert, any band, I'd probably say Led Zeppelin. I didn't see them. If you could interview any musician, I'd probably say Jimi Hendrix, right? Maybe Elvis Presley, who knows, depending on the generation. But Bill Baker's dead. If I could interview any Bromeliad breeder, it would be Bill Baker. He did Dickies. I think he was in California, and there are a lot of names of states like Dakota, California. He also did a series with Tarzan. There's Tarzan, Jane, son of Tarzan, Cheetah. So this whole Tarzan thing, they're all really good Dickies. Gary Hendricks isn't active. I love his hybrids. He does medium things, kind of like this size, where this is full grown. This is called Rubens Wrangle. It's a really medium. And it's a really old variegated, one of the early variegated plants, but it colors up nicely, easy to grow, and it's a great medium. And this, out of the blue, like nobody had it. It's kind of a rare thing just because it's so old and common. And it went through this big surge in Thailand about 5 years ago, just before the pandemic, and suddenly this plant was going for big money, and it's popular again. And I think they used it in breeding. But Grace Hoop did some stuff like black plants. I usually bring Nelson and Mandela. Those are two of hers. There's another one called Blackout from the same Grex. All three are black in the plant. There's not a lot of black in bromeliads. And so I keep Nelson and Mandela on the same bench so I can say Nelson Mandela came to my nursery. But Grace Hoop died at 102 years old, still making hybrids. She did a lot of little middies like Lily Gutiana crosses, and some of the stuff, the breeding, and some of these middies, you can tell which ones have Lily Gutiana because they'll have these undulating margins where it's just like wavy, and that's a Lily Gutiana thing. Lisa Van Zant's active, but I've heard she's kind of private, and she's in Hawaii. I don't know anybody that knows her personally, but where Chester Skotek has names like Untamed Tiger and Ravenous and all these like aggressive names, Lisa Van Zant has like Cat's Pajamas and Blueberry Scone and like really nice names. But Lisa's active and she does really good work, and a lot of people mention her. Dennis Heckert and Mike Gower, also on the Big Island in Hawaii. Mike's a Chinese-American guy, he's wonderful. Dennis is a great breeder. They're doing Hohenbergius and Nancy Bakius, and some really interesting things. David Sheehy does foliage breeches. He's also in Hawaii, and he's retiring. His daughter is Royanne. And a lot of times if you see some foliage breach that you want, you end up at Sheehy Nursery, and Royanne will answer your email. And very active. Jason Mellica is a breeder, like Grant mentioned him. He's a young guy. He's out on tour doing a talk like how to use pallets and scrap material to build a greenhouse for your plants. And he did a talk just before I did one in Vero Beach, and this lady was going, you know, we all just watched him for an hour, and it was real interesting, but not a person in that room would ever build what he built. And I was like, I would like to be entertaining, that whether you believe me or not, at least it was fun. Jason Mellica, Grant Groves talked about doing stuff that, like, Grant would say, that's not going to work, don't do it. And then sure enough, Jason does a cross and comes out with some plants, and he has these crazy names like Apollo's Poetry. And so you can tell it's a Jason Melica hybrid if it has like 8 syllables and some Greek god in the name. So Nick Beckman does Nakataxa. He's a Boca guy, and he's active in the West Palm Bromeliad group. Andy Zakanin is doing Hechias. He's doing his PhD on Hechias. He's been to Brazil a lot. He's doing Mexico and Brazil with Hohenbergias and Hechias. And then, of course, I mentioned Pamela Hyatt. You should check out her Bird Rock Tropicals. She's got a website. These guys I included because the day that I was supposed to be selling plants and the World Conference open to the public, these 2 guys came from Brazil. This is Geleno Machado. If you're on Facebook, you probably know Geleno. And he's got an incredible collection and a really wonderful guy. But they came from Brazil, and the only day they could come was the day of the World Conference. And I would have said no, but it was also the only day I could get fiber optic internet installed. And so I was having to do like underground pipes under sidewalks and shoot pipes through and design how I'm going to get, my property, a lot of you, it's a long distance to get pipes and wires through. And I'm trying to get all the pipes in place ahead of the fiber optic cable being shot through by the contractors and entertaining Geleno and answering the phone for people at the World Conference that wanted plants. And so it was kind of fun getting to meet Geleno during this conference. This is Jose. He's a backyard grower that has maybe the best skills at growing bromeliads without commercial shade houses. And he showed up for this talk. I call him the unicorn. So the extravaganza is coming up. It's in Orlando. It's in September. So you can drive up. It's open for free to sail. You can see the show and who did what, who brought plants to this show. And you can buy plants for free. You don't have to register, but the speakers are going to be really good. But then 2028, if you want to travel, go to Nong Nu because seeing bromeliads and seeing Thailand. So that's the end.